So our submission on this is due in the end of next week. So apologies, this has all been very rushed, but Jen has done a sterling job at putting together the highlight package for you today. We will be incorporating this into a submission which you will receive tomorrow, I think, with the papers for this committee. And that will just be a cover paper with our proposed submission. So Jen's just going to take you through that now to give you an overview of what's in it.
Thank you, Siobhan, and kia ora. Yes, on Friday last week at 1 p.m, the government released the Water Services Entities Amendment Bill, which is the fourth piece of the puzzle that we were waiting for, which was very kind of them, so it gave us all a bit of time over the weekend to become familiar with it, which was appreciated. The bill was introduced into the House on Tuesday. They're yet to confirm the exact drop deadline for submissions, but we've been told expect between 1 and 2 weeks. And because July isn't a particularly busy time for this council, I understand we do everything in June. We're just going to make sure we're good and ready and cross the line next week. So that's good. It keeps us nice and focused with regard to that. So before we hop into the presentation proper, the amendment bill is a technical bill. It's written in kind of a pizzicato kind of way. It serves a good purpose, though. It actually deals with two things. The first thing is other legislation that would require territorial authorities to rush out and consult again. There's changes in timing with regard to transition, which would be disruptive for councils and also for the formation of entities. So that was a key thing in the mind of the government, it's clear. And the other things that have been introduced we'll cover in the presentation. So let's begin. Right. So the final piece of the puzzle, as mentioned, so the Water Services Entities Amendment Bill 2023 gives effect to the Cabinet decisions on water reforms made in April and May earlier this year. So there was a reset in response to submissions about local voice and just how these entities would work with councils. So it's an omnibus bill that amends more than one act, the Water Services Entities Act 2022, and it enables amendments in other acts. So we won't get into that nitty-gritty today, but it's just so you're aware of that. The amendment bill functions as the implementation of broad policy to provide for and adjust the establishment, governance, functions and accountability arrangements for 10 publicly owned water services. And as mentioned, it deals with transitional arrangements such as local authority responsibilities for planning, reporting and rating during the establishment period. And we do care about that. So this slide here shows the picture, which I'm sure that you'll recall, of the 10 water service entities. So it generally follows regional boundaries and is way more than 4. It provides for every territorial authority to be represented on the regional representative group, or the RRG, of their entity with an equal number of mana whenua representatives. So we get a seat round the table, which is good. A key point which we will look at is the introduction of a staggered approach for entity establishment between the 1st of July 2024 and the 1st of July 2026, which is indeed 2 years. The legislation makes it clear that the 1st of July 2024 belongs to Entity A. They're well underway with their formation, and the other 9 entities will look forward to some advice as to where we line up for the next cabs off the rank. We have indicated with other councils within the Wellington region that we're quite keen to be near the front of the queue, but we need to wait to find out just where we fit with regard to that. So the amendment bill, as well as those 2 key things, does some other things. There's a brand new thing called a community priority statement that gives community groups with an interest in a water body an opportunity to make statements directly to their entity about their priorities for the body. So this is something that the Water Services entity is responsible for fielding. Within the entity, they'll form their own customer forum, which will help the RRG understand the views and the priorities. So this is a nod to community engagement and people being able to, in a formal way, organise their thoughts about what's important to them, both in service delivery and environmental outcomes. Other things, the next one is the bill outlines a proposed process to enable locally led voluntary mergers of entities straight away. So that is interesting for us. So that's noted in new Schedule 2A of the 2022 WSA, and it enables entities to merge if their RRG groups decide to. There's quite a lot of talk within the amendment bill regarding the due process and the reasons for it and sort of requisite activity to actually get there. Once all of that is done, it's sealed by an order in council giving effect to the merger. It does also interestingly note that the minister can only refuse it if on reasonable grounds the process was not in accordance with the Act and the merger implementation plan. So, yeah, it's a process-led thing. So there's that. We can talk about, at question time at the end, we can sort of pile back into these things for details if you wish. The other thing is it covers the entity financing arrangements, including provision for a dedicated water services funding agency. So the reason for that is to be able to pull risk and achieve scale. It provides market access benefits relating to the entity financing, which is good, and we will be covering that off in our submission, the ins and outs of that and what that actually means. And shared services is another thing that is covered. Now, so the shared services arrangements, the bill talks about how in a voluntary way or by ministerial direction in defined areas, services can be shared across entities. So within the amendment bill, areas that have been indicated as being a good idea for shared services are debt funding and management, for example, through the funding agency, information and communication technology, digital infrastructure procurement and management, workforce management, and management of risk insurance, other procurement, and supply chain management. One thing that I think we should draw some attention to is if it's very easy to share services and it's kind of expected, what does that actually mean for us in terms of the reason in the first place for having 10 entities and for communities within a region being able to be directly involved in what's actually going on? So it's worth us considering that within the submission possibly, because we have the undertaking from government that the 10 entity solution strikes the right balance between ensuring cost savings and the delivery of water infrastructure, while also ensuring that those water entities are strongly grounded in their local communities. So we've achieved every council being represented around the table on the RRG and guiding those local water entities. So it's a bit of a concern that it's a possibility that this could be diluted by, entities sort of joining with their shared services, especially if it's in the communication type area as well. So that's something that we're thinking about. So there's a lot of thinking on this one bill. Sorry, and the last bit there on the slide is around transitional arrangements for local government and water services entities, and we'll look at that a wee bit in the following slides. Right, as we have alluded to, it's quite a tight time frame for all legislation to pass before the House rises in September. Everything needs to land with royal assent against it before the 31st of August. I think there's only like 23, 24 more sitting days as well, so it's pretty tight. The bill that was introduced in the House on Tuesday this week has had its first reading, and it will trundle along for its royal assent before the end of August. The diagram just below that actually shows as well the other two bills that are in play that have had their second reading, the Water Services legislation bill and the other bill relating to economic efficiency and consumer protection. So if we just go back a wee bit. So that blue box to the right shows how it all fits together. So we're talking about the Water Services Entities Amendment Bill, which is the sticky glue that keeps it all together and will eventually sort of update the Water Services Entities Act to a 2023. Right, in order to land this thing, we've got a transition runway. So the amendment bill intends that we have a clear runway to continue delivering water services during the extended establishment period. So what has been indicated is that we continue to provide and fund water services during the establishment period, which could be anything from 1 year to 2 years, somewhere in there. It includes transitional arrangements within legislation to deal with long-term planning, reporting and rate setting. Most councils will continue to have responsibilities for water service delivery beyond the 1st of July 2024 and into the first 2 years of the 24-34 long-term planning and reporting cycle. The bill also proposes to amend the transitional arrangements in the Water Services Entities Act 2022 to ensure these arrangements align with the establishment 10 water service entities between that transition period of 24 to 26. Right, that said, there are things that we must do. We must plan to at least maintain existing levels of service over those 2 years of delivery. And there is a list of things that the long-term plan must include as outlined in Schedule 10 for groups of activities for the first 2 years. So just glancing at that, I won't read it all out. It's the things you'd expect to see, for example, funding impact statements for groups of activities, forecast financial statements, the stuff that we do with our LTPs. So happily, it's quite clear what's expected of us, things that we must do. And there's some things we don't have to do. It's nice. We are not required to amend an adopted long-term plan to deal with any change or decision on entity establishment dates. As I mentioned before, that's a very good idea because otherwise we'd have to go back out to consult on something we had no control over, and it would be awkward and not helpful for anyone. The other thing we don't have to do is include DIA non-performance measures for water services or include information on water services and infrastructure strategies, or estimate the effects of any uncertainty relating to water services reforms. So that's been put in there as a bit of guidance to us as we consider how we construct our work around our long-term plan, infrastructure strategy and annual report. Rating. It says within the amendment bill that councils must assess, set and collect rates and recover unpaid rates like we do, subject to any remission, postponement or writing off of rates for water services to be provided by us in that district for all that financial year. This would apply even if responsibilities are due to be transferred to a water services entity partway through the financial year. So for argument's sake, if the quarter that we went on to transition with the formation of NCG was, say, the 1st of October 2024, then the money that we are collecting for rates in that year for water services would be stockpiled and handed over as soon as practicable, is the expectation. So there's that. again, development contributions, we continue on with our work. So we're not required to review parts of a policy on development contributions that relate to water services infrastructure as ordinarily required under Section 1066. Until the establishment date, the water services entity, a territorial authority, can continue to include requirements relating to water services infrastructure in the development contributions policy. We can require development contributions for the water services infrastructure that we've been planning to provide, and we can require development contributions for capital expenditure relating to water services infrastructure that may or will be incurred in the future, even if and to the extent that capital expenditure will be incurred after the entity establishment date. So we've been encouraged to BAU in that space until such time it's time to hand it over. So in considering all of these things, we have a submission and draft that you'll see quite soon, tomorrow, covering these topics of entity mergers, the Water Service Funding Agency, shared services arrangements, and the transitional arrangements for us. We have a few technical questions around how that fits together, which will be included in the submission. So that's quite a lot. Are there any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. That was a lot of information in a short amount of time. I've got Councillor Brown. And yep, you're on the list.
I guess a couple of things I'm curious about. One of them is the Water Services Funding Agency, which obviously is, I would have thought an absolutely critical part of the overall equation. I mean, frankly, just one thing I've never understood was why they were taking more responsibility for providing that sort of funding right from day one. But is this a new part of the deal? And are they going to give the water service entity basically money at the government stock rate? I mean, do you have any idea? Because, I mean, we all know that the Crown Infrastructure Partner funding that we're using for sludge minimisation is quite expensive, especially vis-a-vis government debt. Is there anything, do we have any line of sight about, and is our submission going to be pushing for government to effectively be providing that funding at the government stock rate? Because I really feel like we should, because ultimately most of the cost of the water service going forward is going to be related to the cost of capital. And the sort of half-baked, neoliberal, if I can use that pejorative phrase, approach is wrong in my view. And I think we should be really pushing for the government to man up on this thing, rather than just casting these entities adrift and saying, make sure you've got a good rating from S&P, and so that's one thing. And the other one comes to the shared services, because I understand that the government or some agency, some sort of part of the government, is going out for submissions on the IT systems, and apparently there's close to $1 billion IT program. They're kind of looking, the idea they're going to do bulk buy IT for the whole lot, and then impose it on everybody. So is that the sharing deal? That are we aware of that? And do we have a position on that? Do we think that's a good idea that some government agency goes and does this stuff for our water service entity, or where do we sit on this one?
Thank you, Councillor Brown, for those two questions. I'll defer to Sarah for the first one, and me for the second.
Sure, I can respond to that. Thank you for the question. Observation. So that's quite in line with what we've already sort of included in the submission that we've drafted to date. So effectively, to date, we have not seen a solution to any of this, the problem that you've highlighted. There have been, through the reform process, conversations going on with the likes of the local government funding agency to see if there are parallels there that they could utilise their services to fund these entities. This bill now contemplates them not participating. However, the way it's been drafted in here with some complications to make it slightly different. It's very much akin to what the local government funding agency looks like in practice, albeit there's a different ownership structure contemplated through this, etc. So we have said, yes, it's nice that you've got this in here, but you still haven't told us what the funding solution is for these entities.
Should we go to
Tim, could you use your mic, please?
Because, I mean, that would, I think the idea, I mean, I'd rather it was lower cost of money than local government debt, but if that's the best we can target in the short term, I mean, presumably LGFA is putting in a submission.
So they didn't on the last one because they felt that they were communicating with them through different channels, so they decided not to make a submission on the previous one because they felt conflicted. They see it as us, as local government, to have a say on this as opposed to them as a separate entity. That was the view that they took last time, and I would say that now they are further removed from this, that they won't be submitting, is my gut feeling. I do have a Shareholders Council meeting on Friday. I can clear that up and come back to you. And I did speak to Andrew Meikle on Monday, and he didn't suggest that he was going to be putting in a submission on this one. But I can follow up and find out for you.
Cool, thank you. Councillors, we do have a few people on the question list, so I'm just going to limit it to probably 2 questions and then we'll circle back. We should have enough time to go through everyone though. Councillor Calvert.
Oh, I was just going to respond to this, the shared
bad.
service question. Regarding IT and how it all actually practically fits together, we're looking forward to the DIA's roadshow next week on Tuesday, where they're going to go, this is how we're going to put this thing together. So after that, then at the appropriate time, another briefing as to how the next few months actually look, what we're building, what it means for us would be appropriate to come back with some facts. But I personally suspect that IT may well be part of the function of the entity structure, but I can't confirm at this point.
Thanks, Jen. Apologies for cutting you off there. Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. Mine's more of a comment to feed back in, but I don't know if it's correct, but I read the other day that one of the amendments made to the bill was to have the water entities take care of natural water courses on properties that are used for stormwater. I'm not sure whether that's accurate or not. It was just something I read, but I just want to say that I think it's something that we should support if it is there, because apparently it was a late amendment last week into the bill. It's something that normally Greater Wellington Regional Council look after, but actually individual property owners currently are responsible for their own little strip, but there's amendments saying that actually the water entity should take care, it should be responsible. It's a bit like our laterals. Where we've taken them back, not the property owner. So maybe you could look into that for me, but because you're looking puzzled. But I just thought it's really important for homeowners and ratepayers in Wellington.
Yeah, just to answer your question, it's not contained within this amendment bill. However, it is discussed in the Select Committee reports in relation to the appropriate treatment of stormwater management and how that actually fits together. But I'll be happy to get back to you with a bit of detail around what has been proposed and what it actually means. That's in the WSL Select Committee report.
Okay, just whenever. We just file that away just to clue that in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just ask that councillors please refrain from making suggestions and statements, more put it in the form of a question, otherwise it can be an amendment or set in debate next week. Deputy Mayor Foon.
Kia ora and thank you. Just could you give me a practical example of what outlines proposed process to enable locally led voluntary mergers of entities could mean in a practical sense?
I'd love to be able to do that, Councillor.
Does it mean that entity, what are we, entity G could merge with entity F the day after?
That's a very good question. I think you'll find that may be featured in the submission that is coming out soon.
we need an explanation of what
the only
possibility means?
yes,
Yeah.
that would be helpful. The only indication of time within the amendment bill is around the reporting back of how the merge is going every quarter. That's the only mention of chunks of time. So yeah, there are certainly some hanging questions with regard to how that's supposed to work.
Okay. And sorry, just if I can understand this better. So does it also mean that entities can merge specific areas of the entities? So when you're talking about procurement, for example, that could entity G merge with F to buy things or something like that, to procure?
Yeah.
Sorry, I think that part of it will be covered off in the shared services, and they've listed a number
Right.
of areas where they can do that.
Okay.
So they will be able to get some of that.
Sorry, could we?
Sorry. Some of that, the scale up of economies of scale that were contemplated through the first, when there were only 4 entities and we could do things on a bigger scale, so we got value for money. So things like insurance, but this other list of things, and that's where they'll be looking to take advantage of that. There's specified areas, but I don't think it's a complete list. There might be other areas.
So let's not confuse shared services with merging as well. They're two separate things. The way the amendment bill has been written around merging, it's around existing entities actually in all things merging to become a larger entity, because it talks about how the RRGs work and how there's representation of at least 2 members of an existing RRG from an entity forming part of the implementation entity board. But anyway, we're getting into the details there with what's suggested.
Cool. Do you mind if we we can come back?
No.
Councillor Randall.
Yes, this has been staged in terms of the rollout. What is your advice? I mean, I just want you to comment a bit more about where you think, whether we want to be early or late in terms of being phased in.
Yes, Siobhan can answer that.
I can answer
And why,
that. Yeah, I think our preference would be to go as soon as possible.
And why?
Just so that we have certainty sooner over what assets we own and what assets we're expected to manage on behalf of our ratepayers. And also, I think the risk of Wellington Water, as they go into wind down mode, the longer that wind down mode, the period of time, the longer that is, I think the more risk that presents.
Okay, and you don't think, comment in form of a question, you don't think that the risk of going early when we're going to have whole new computer systems, whole new sets of legislation, new scope for what exact services are isn't a significant risk, and maybe given what else we've got to deal with, that we shouldn't go a bit later?
I think we should only go early if we're ready to go early.
Okay.
Councillor Chung.
Thanks very much. There are a whole lot of things I didn't understand, but one of them in particular was it said, one of the slides said there's no long-term plan provision required, but is that actually a good thing? Because I don't like surprises. So should we actually have a plan B for and have provision in the long-term plan for this, just in case?
I can answer that question if you like. Sorry. Hi.
Yep.
The long-term plan, what we're currently doing is we're planning to run 2 separate scenarios. So we've got one scenario that reforms will proceed as intended through the legislation that is being developed, and we've got another in case it doesn't proceed, and that could be, anything to do with election outcomes, those kind of things. So we are running those different scenarios. At the time of adopting the long-term plan, you as an elected member need to have assurance that the long-term plan's based on the best underlying information that's available to us. And so that will depend on what's happening on the day you basically adopt. So we're managing that through the LTP process.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Oh, it's another question. I'm so lucky. as you know, we are faced almost certainly with a major water shortage this summer. In fact, if you believe the forecast that we received from the Wellington Water a couple of weeks ago, it really could be quite devastating. And we do need, there are a whole range of short and long-term things that we should be doing. I mean, the short-term things are obviously nothing to do with the Three Waters reforms. But the longer-term initiatives, is there, I mean, does it sort of change the kind of need for us to actually be thinking about the long-term needs? And we were told by Wellington Water that, you know, because we haven't made decisions in the past, in particular around either metering / leak remediation or storage, that's why we've got this colossal problem, you know, we're facing right now. But is there what's the urgency for us? What's the responsibility on us to actually be addressing that problem now? Or do we just kick up a touch and say, tough luck, Wellington, you can, you know, don't worry about having a bath for the next few summers?
I think we should be focusing on what we can do in the short term, which is, again, that leak management. The leakages have increased over time, which has exacerbated the problem. There was a business case that was in place for meters, which I think was put on hold last year. So that would still be in business case phase if it was continuing. So I think it's probably, you know, what we should be doing is carrying on with the leak management, because that's what we can do in the short term, and potentially picking up that business case for water meters again. But we know what the scope of that water meter solution would be, but ultimately it'd be for the water services entity to implement.
You know, it's going to be them implementing, but after all, if we were to make a decision, you know, ASAP around metering, then presumably we could at least start something on that front. Or is it something where at very best we would, I mean, is there any possibility that we could be implementing a metering program in advance of our transferring our water activities into this entity? Or is it always going to be something which, whatever planning we do, it's always going to be them who implements?
I would probably suggest it would, with probably 50% or 70% probability, it would be them implementing it. It would be a really significant program. You've got the value. What's about $1 billion across the region.
Chris, sorry, could you give your answer over a mic, please?
Sorry. It'd be about $1 billion worth of work. Realistically, you couldn't get that off the ground in time. And even if you did the planning work, it would be an item of significance that the DIA would be involved in helping to prioritise across the existing asset management plan. So it'd be a tricky thing to do to get that up, which is why I think, as Siobhan said, focusing on leaks and the optimisation of Wellington Water at the moment is probably the key lever that we have to pull.
Tim, Mike.
So given that they've decided, so you say they've had all those boxes ticked so they can actually roll out their metering program because they've done all that prep work and consenting and all the rest of it?
I wasn't aware that they'd actually decided and it had all been approved and funded. I understand there was a political discussion at the Water Committee, but that was it?
No, I don't think they've made a decision.
I didn't think that the council had actually made a decision to fund it at this point in time. I'm not across the council's work. I can come back to you and I can ask around and see if they have and let you know, but I didn't think they had. I don't think they could afford it.
I guess that I'm sort of looking at the probability of what's going to happen in the summer, and thinking an advertising campaign and, you know, please limit your showers is going to be a pretty lame response, isn't it? Even if we've actually done the leak stuff.
I think the trick there is advertising and behavioural change stuff does work, but I think what you need to do is couple it with subsurface leak detection. So and that's always been the challenge. So when you look at all the leaks that we get in, the ones that we create the most noise, the ones that you see are really in the scale of things are actually quite low volume leaks compared to the subsurface ones. The ones that they go around, they find it's underground, go straight into the dirt, and you never see it. They're the ones that are going to have the biggest impact on this, and just making sure that the bulk water network is secure as possible.
All right, Councillor Free, and we can always circle back.
Yeah, when you talk about we'd be, if we were ready, it'd be good to go early. And I noticed that in this provisions now, there's voluntary amalgamation allowed for, and our present Wellington water boundaries are not that much different from our Entity 10. Are you thinking that basically what we've got in the way of Wellington water will just expand to include the other not yet included TAs?
I'll answer that. I think there's general consensus across the shareholding councils that they don't want that to be the case.
Okay, they want a fresh entity. Okay. Then my next question about being ready is how are we going with our asset, our condition assessments, which we all agreed were pretty important, especially things like our treatment plants, our high criticality assets. How's that all going? Or is it?
The high criticality, the very high criticality assets have all been done. So you had that presentation a few months ago. I think on the rest of the condition asset data collection, there's still a fair amount of resistance from putting a lot of investment into that area. I have been talking to the consultants who's been responsible for putting the asset management plans together for Entity C as it was. And again, there's not, I don't think, a huge push from the NTU or from any of the individual entities to really focus on that. So that's something that we will lobby hard for, because obviously you can't really produce an asset management plan if you don't have any data on the condition of your assets.
And again, in terms of being ready, how are we going with our negotiations on our funding, on our compensatory funding?
At this stage, we're still waiting to hear back from the DIA, NTU, DIA, who the people are we were talking to on the other side. We're one of two councils left to receive our settlement statement because they haven't landed, we haven't agreed on a number for the debt. It is imminent. They've agreed that they're going to come back to us very, very soon. They haven't said what that looks like, but we're expecting that any day now. And effectively, we have held the line that we cannot have this conversation without the no worse off funding provision being included in that. The difficulty on their side is that they have to bring in sort of two counterparties, so the Treasury and the DIA need to talk about this, and that seems to be where the constraint lies.
I would further add that in my discussions informally through the DIA, they have been very supportive of that approach and noted privately that they would have taken the same approach if they were in the same financial situation as Wellington City Council is.
So they're sympathetic to our arguments.
Very sympathetic to us, and they do understand it. They're very knowledgeable about our finances. We've been working with them really proactively. Sarah has been immensely helpful to that process. So while we're one of two that haven't signed, I think we should be quite comfortable with that, because I'm worried for some of the other councils that have signed and haven't necessarily thought about the longer term implications.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Well, if all of that gets sorted, let's go for it.
Cool, Mutu, that's the end of the question list. I'll just suggest the paper for this. Are you expecting for it to come out tomorrow or this evening?
The paper is going to be finished in about 6 minutes, and aiming to publish it later on.
Wow.
I think it's due to be published close of business today.
Oh, we are so lucky. Just make sure that we will have a lot of papers to read before next week, colleagues. So it might pay to get reading early.
quite a lot
DEM
to write.
services are definitely aiming to publish it
Yeah.
today.
Cancel your weekend plans. Yeah, no, cool. Hey, thanks so much. Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Siobhan, and thank you, everyone else who's joined us. Appreciate it.